Coming up, it is the 2024 NFL Draft, and no more important for any team than the New York Football Giants. We dive in on the 6th overall pick, the rumors around Drake May, JJ McCarthy, Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze. What will Big Blue do, and how will it impact the rest of the draft after round one kicks off tonight? We dive in coming up next. Yes, my friends, it is OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where you know that we are your host. Over here, Adam Armbrecht. Over there, Andrew Makowitz. We always appreciate you coming in and joining us today live on YouTube, 9 a.m., bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, because it's the kickoff day. NFL Draft is finally here, Andy, after everything. I think everybody in the last 24 to 36 hours starting to do the obligatory, okay, I'm tired of this. Okay, let's get it over with now. When do we finally get there? But we get to plant our flag on what we think the Giants are going to do. And there still are a handful of rumors. They feel less widespread and starting to drill down a little bit on what the Giants are going to do at 6.
Yeah, it is interesting. This morning, all the national media as well as the local beat writers end up putting out their final official mock draft. And what I find fascinating about this time is you feel like over the last couple of months they've pretty much said every name. So whoever gets drafted, they'll just go back to like a month ago and say, "Remember, I told you this a month ago. I know yesterday I picked this guy, but I told you a month ago." So clearly, I knew what was going on.
And it's funny too. I'll use Ryan Dunleavy as the example because he was actually he was calling himself out about it. When he said, I should have had more conviction 3 weeks ago when I thought that this could be the case. But that's what it is, though. I mean, when you hear Joe Schoen talk about it at his press conference, paralysis by analysis, I think that's what happens to everybody. You go, okay, well, maybe it's this. Well, no, but then it could be that. Maybe they'll trade up. Maybe they'll trade down. Maybe they'll stay there. And, the funny thing to me is we look at it internally from where the Giants are. And, of course, certainly some things that are going on around with other teams. But if you're inside the mechanism for another franchise, all of these narratives cannot live together. This is not the multiverse. So something has to shake out. Everybody has to kind of stake their claim in the end. And it looks like, at least for right now, that we'll just say, clear this off the top. One of the more fast burning, I'll call it a firework, the Drake May New York Football Giants getting up there to 3 to get their franchise quarterback. Well, it certainly is by no means dead. It burned as bright as humanly possible for about 24 hours, and then all of the rumors start coming out, believe them or not, that the Patriots, they like Drake May. They'd be happy to stay there and take him. The cost may be too high for Big Blue to get up there. And all of a sudden, you go right back to resetting. Okay, pick 6. What does it look like? What are the Giants possibly going to do?
Yeah, well, so obviously everyone picked up traction and steam on the Drake May to the Giants. The Giants are looking to trade up. The Patriots seem like a partner. The GM of the Patriots says they're open for business. And then right after that report comes out, right around lunchtime, Jay Glazer, who seems to hit a lot of these stories, he's not a guy that has very many misses, comes out and says the Patriots really like Drake May a lot.
Oh,
And
of
it's like, okay,
course they
well,
do.
if they do, then why would the Patriots trade with the Giants when they both need quarterbacks if they really like him? So it felt like that kind of fizzled out very quickly. And
Right.
everyone is still now reporting players, people are, media and beat writers for the team are still reporting the Giants would still love Drake May and they would love to trade up for him. So keep an eye out on that. But all things are saying that rumor that we talked about what draft capital it would take to move up. We talked about how that would change the plan. For me right now, I'm kind of putting that on the back burner. It doesn't seem very likely that the Giants will be able to move up to 3, especially because the Patriots are like, hey, we need a quarterback too. We're just going to stay here and take our guy.
Of course. And if you're over on YouTube, obviously throwing this one up live, feel free to get in the chat. It's always my preference that Dr. Pancake is the first one in the building, just because it's an easy shout out. It's a fun one. And I've seen him getting in the chats on our videos over the last few weeks as well as we build towards the draft. So feel free. Who do you want at 6? Shout it out inside of the chat. Who do you want them to maybe move up for, move back for? What's your best version of it? We'll get into all those along the way here as well. When we talk about then, because I agree with you, I think for all intents and purposes, I'm going to put the Drake May trade up scenario to bed for right now for the Giants. We said how steep it could be. Other teams may be sniffing around, but if we start to look at the 6th overall pick, then let's follow the money. Let's follow the money, Andy, from 1 to 6 before we talk about what we think the Giants are going to do here, and from a local to high national level coverage. Maybe we're getting a little bit leaning our way. Finally, getting some traction on Rome Odunze being the guy at 6, but money is moving here, and some different teams are maybe making different decisions, especially just ahead of the Giants at 5.
Yeah, so I can run through the top of the draft a little bit so you can start framing exactly where you think things are going to start falling. And it feels like the draft will really start at 4, but I'm gonna really just run through
Yeah,
this briefly for you. Number one overall pick, obviously the NFL doesn't want them saying it out loud. It is going to be Caleb Williams. You know, you can put whatever tinfoil hat you want on. It's just not happening. Caleb Williams is the pick there.
right.
Overwhelming. I'm surprised they still even have it listed on FanDuel as something that you can potentially wager on. The second pick has moved drastically as Jaden Daniels is the overwhelming favorite to Washington. And obviously, the reporting, Adam, is he doesn't really want to play for him. He would be okay playing for the Commanders. He really wants to reunite with one of his college coaches, Antonio Pierce, Las Vegas Raiders. Still a little bit of risk there, but overwhelming favorite minus 950. Basically, you'd almost have to put down $1,000 to win $100. Don't see that as a wise investment. When you move to 3 and you start talking about where the Patriots sit, obviously Drake May is the overwhelming favorite at minus 300. Basically, would have to risk $300 to win $100. He is clearly the odds-on favorite to be number 3 for the Patriots, but also now that you hear the Vikings, you hear about the Giants wanting to get up into that third spot, even if it's not the Patriots picking, which it sounds like it will be. It looks like Drake May will be the third quarterback off the board. Surprisingly, the second best odds at number 3 are JJ McCarthy. They're basically saying no matter who's picking or what they're thinking about, it will be one of those two
Do you,
quarterbacks.
do
Jaden
you
Daniels
find it do you
third.
find it surprising at all that so after all of this, like just a sidebar for a second, after all of this, because once the Drake May trade up hype started, specifically for the Giants, it was, oh, well, there you go, that's the guy. If you're going to take a quarterback, you go all in, you go with Drake May. He's been clearly in the top 3, sometimes talked about being second overall here when we look at the draft board. And JJ McCarthy, that was just smoke and mirrors. This guy's a 30th overall. Maybe Penix Jr. is better than him as a prospect. But then when you go here and you say, well, no matter what, if it's not going to be Drake May, it's still going to be a quarterback. So that still means that somebody, Giants or otherwise, is looking at it and saying, if I'm getting up there, it still feels like that. Or I'll give the little wrinkle. Is it because the Patriots, the Tom Brady, the tie to Michigan, and that's still giving a little bit of a bubble up there in terms of his odds?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that actually informs the fourth pick, Adam. So good on you to think about that.
Dude, here I
Now,
am.
this is where I feel like the draft is going to really start unless something happens where the Patriots get blown away with a Godfather type offer. Now, the Cardinals have a bunch of different needs. Obviously, wide receiver is one of them, but they don't seem to need a quarterback with Kyler Murray under contract.
No.
I think he might be their franchise guy. Puts them in a unique spot to be able to either take the best wide receiver that's available or potentially move out and get a king's ransom from someone that desperately needs a quarterback. And that's how the odds makers kind of have it right now. Marvin Harrison Jr., overwhelming favorite to be the number 4 pick in the NFL draft, regardless of who's going to be there. What I find fascinating about this, and where do you think this lands for you in terms of who do you think is the next most likely person to be picked at 4, Adam?
If not Marvin Harrison Jr. Well, I'm going to assume it's fascinating in that it's not JJ McCarthy then. Like it's not like someone's trading up to get JJ at that point. Logic would say it'd be JJ McCarthy would be the assumption. If not him, I'll say Malik Neighbors just to keep the ball rolling here. But there has to be something
Yeah,
surprising
so
here.
that's exactly. I looked at it and I
Okay.
said, "Huh," because JJ McCarthy is third best odds to be selected there. Malik Neighbors is fourth best odds to be selected there. They have Drake May as the second most likely pick at 4. Does that tell you anything? Because it tells me something right out of the gate.
Well, I that it's not a guarantee what's happening at 3 still. That there's still this possibility that the Patriots are looking at that board. And when you heard them, by the way, in terms of the old rumor mill, when you heard it come out that said, "Oh, the Patriots actually like Drake May a lot and they'd be happy to stay there and take him at 3." That seems so counterintuitive based on all of the discussions that were happening ahead of that. So it would feel more likely if we want to go. If I was a Patriots fan and I put on my tinfoil hat, I'd say, "Oh, they're trying to get some buzz around the fact that they like Drake May and they would take him." When in reality, they'd be perfectly content to take JJ McCarthy, and that would bump Drake May actually down the board a spot.
Yeah, well, it's interesting too, Adam, because a lot of the reports coming out of New England yesterday after we recorded were, the Patriots have a very short list of 6 players that they
It's so short.
absolutely love in the
It's
first
so
round.
short.
And so we messaged out, on X, basically like, huh, that's a very specific, oddly specific number at 6. Could it be that they think with 4, like, 3 best quarterbacks, maybe 4 best quarterbacks, and 3 transformational wide receivers, like the 6th pick is a perfect spot for them to maybe soft landing and prep people for it. So I found that fascinating that they called that out yesterday, and these odds are suggesting it. So, what do you ultimately think happens with the 4th pick? Do you think that the Cardinals stick there and just take Marvin Harrison Jr.? Do you think a team is just gonna, like the Minnesota Vikings, are gonna pay whatever they can to get whichever quarterback is left? Like, where's your head at?
Yeah, I think it ends up being Marvin Harrison Jr. Like, I think, we're talking about quarterbacks in this draft class. You're talking about teams that need to get their franchise guy. Kyler Murray, we know the injury, but he comes back. He shows that he can still obviously play at a high level. If you are the Arizona Cardinals, you're still in the Kyler Murray is our franchise quarterback and we can win with him. So what's phase two? I mean, what are we talking about? Go get an elite wide receiver, right? Get an elite weapon to make his job, to make the offense's job that much easier. So I'll assume that it still ends up being Cardinals stay at 4. Cardinals go ahead and take Marvin Harrison Jr., who, even though there's been a little bit, push and pull, excuse me, around wide receivers, Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, we'll talk about that. But I just think that the reason why there's been less chatter around Marvin Harrison Jr. is because he knew that he was going to be the first wide receiver taken off the board. So I'll stick with MHJ there at 4 for Arizona.
Yeah, it feels like the Cardinals are in the best position where they have a franchise quarterback, but have flexibility, but still can get a generational talent at 4. Like, that's kind of the sweet spot of where I think the draft really gets started, Adam. And when you move past the 4th pick, it's been strange what's been going on with the Los Angeles Chargers.
Yes.
There's been some crazy rumors going on about like what's the most likely thing to happen. At number 5, the most likely pick is JJ McCarthy at the 5th spot. Now, that could
Right
be
out.
for a whole host of reasons. JJ McCarthy's odds to be drafted by the Chargers have gone from 100 to 1 down to 6 to 1, now down to 3 to 1. Everyone's putting it together that maybe Jim Harbaugh, after saying that he's a better prospect than what he coached in Andrew Luck, would move off of Justin Herbert in order
Yeah.
to get him, which is crazy talk. And Adam Schefter was like, it's not happening. They'd have to eat $100 million of dead money to move on from Justin Herbert. Why on earth would you do that in order to get JJ McCarthy? Makes no sense for them. But Adam, the most fascinating thing that has happened is we've talked about what the Chargers could do. They could trade out. Maybe they take a wide receiver, but Jim Harbaugh likes to build through the trenches, and offensive line seemed to be where things were going. Over the last 24 hours, JC Latham has moved up draft boards significantly. He is the second most likely pick at number 5 to the Chargers. He was not even in the top 10 potentially a couple of days ago, and is now multiple national beat writers have put him as the most likely guy to be mocked to the Chargers
Sure.
at 5, ahead of Joe Alt. Does that surprise you? Do you think it's smoke and mirrors? What do you think about this meteoric rise of JC Latham over the last 24 hours?
The weird part is because like Joe Alt has been, and we did this the other day when we talked about, what was the top of this board here. And I think Joe Alt ended up being maybe 9th or something like that overall. He's 4th right now on ESPN's big board in terms of available prospects coming into the draft class, but maybe even more than where he is or where CJ Latham has risen up is that Fashanu was the other guy being talked about out of Penn State for a long time, right? So he's 17th overall on ESPN as it stands right now. So the idea that somewhat out of left field, a top 10 or top 5 caliber type player has vaulted themselves in there is certainly, I mean, it's surprising to me. And I wonder if it's because some people have said with Joe Alt, it's like fantastic, pure product, plug him in, start him. And why would it hurt his pedigree that he is, pinholed into being this one specific type of player? You don't have to look too far back and think about the Giants and say, well, sometimes when you think you have a guy that's just plug and play at a very specific spot, all of a sudden there's a lack of versatility and a lack of ability to maybe be adaptable if you start to draft other players down the road. Not even about right now, but maybe about what you do 2-3 years from now.
Yeah, and listen, I don't. It seems strange, and the betting markets are go follow the money, and that's why we're kind of going through this. Is what is Vegas saying? What are people wagering on? Who knows what? And it would be
Latham, by the way,
surprising.
just real quick, is 23rd on ESPN's big board, right? Like, so to your point, we're talking about mid 20s, back of the first round, to all of a sudden vaulting at least into the conversation of being in the top 10 picks. And by the way, it just again, I'm using ESPN easy resource. I'll double check over on Draft Buzz as well, but that makes him the the fourth highest ranked offensive tackle coming into the draft. And then if you want to throw in Fashanu, who's the 15th overall on the big board right now, or even Christian Haynes would be the next one up, and he goes well out, well into the back round. So you're talking about, 6 guys effectively on the offensive line available within the first round.
Yeah, I mean, just as an example of how remarkable this is, JC Latham is now minus 150 to be a top 10 pick. Like
Yeah.
that was not the case. He was projected in the mid 20s, as you mentioned before, on ESPN's big board and others. So clearly, how everyone has looked at JC Latham throughout this process, not necessarily what everyone had been mocking for the last couple of months.
No.
So Adam,
Yes.
that kind of puts us at pick number 6. And before I go into it, how does this board fall out to you so far? If it went exactly like this, how would you feel if you were a Giants fan?
So we're talking about, if you're watching over on YouTube, we got it as Williams 1, Daniels 2, May goes 3, and then Marvin Harrison Jr. And even though I'm saying slash trade because there's potential there, and then CJ Latham could be going there at number 5. This is about as perfect a scenario as the Giants could hope for here. Now, we had done this before. If you look and say top 3 quarterbacks and then the top 3 wide receivers, the Giants are guaranteed to get one of those top caliber players at the 6th overall pick. The wrinkle about if you have CJ Latham go is, which I find interesting. Okay, does it open up Joe Alt? Like we talked a little bit this offseason about that. The Giants could certainly pivot and go that way and say, Evan Neal, we hardly knew ye, right? Like, but we're moving on and we're gonna put a new stud in there on the offensive line. It still leaves Malik Neighbors as an option. We'll talk about Rome Odunze, and it still leaves JJ McCarthy. So it puts the Giants in a spot to either one, draft a high quality player at 3 critical positions, offensive line, wide receiver, or franchise QB, and also keeps open the opportunity for a team to call up and say, hey, it wasn't smoke and mirrors. We do like JJ McCarthy. We'd love to come get him. And then the Giants can look about what it means to maybe trade back at that spot.
Yeah, and keep in mind at the number 5 pick right now, just slightly better odds than JC Latham is JJ McCarthy. But for this, because there's so much smoke around JC Latham and the betting markets have moved, we're gonna mock it there as more likely for them to stand pat rather than make the trade, Adam. So it
Right.
gets the Giants at 6. I agree with you. If this is how the board felt, as a Giant fan, you would have to be over the moon, right? Because it gives you both options still potentially on which direction the Giants want to go. If JJ McCarthy is there at 6, if Malik Neighbors and Rome Odunze are there at 6, the Giants have multiple ways that they can go about this. It would not feel like they were forced to either go down the quarterback route or forced to go down the wide receiver earlier.
Do you think that, you said they're stand pat, but just the Chargers there at 5, when you see CJ Latham jump up like that, like I would say too, it probably at least opens the door a little bit wider. That you mentioned second likeliest to go there is JJ McCarthy. It probably does push open that door that a team is willing to come up. And I also, by the way, again, remember enough smoke around the Giants and JJ McCarthy that the reason why he maybe is listed second likeliest to go there is because teams are going to say, well, I'll come up, I'll get ahead of the Giants, and I'll get JJ McCarthy if we think it's possible that they're going to get him. But we're going with Latham right now and saying Chargers stand pat. It is a pretty sexy spot for the Chargers to take an enormous haul to trade down there. Like they could really end up being one of the teams that benefits greatly from the way the first 4 picks go, because so many teams are willing to be locked in or can't trade back because the price is too high.
Yeah, I mean, listen, they just lost 2 big wide receivers as well in Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are no longer there. Austin Eckler is gone. They are fully revamping everything except Justin Herbert at this point.
Yeah.
So all options seem to be on the table for them. I think getting a franchise level offensive tackle is what Jim Harbaugh wants. He wants to build through the trenches. He wants to establish a run game. He wants to be physical at the line of scrimmage. To me, it feels like that is a more likely pick than him going with like the flashy wide receiver. That just doesn't seem to be in Jim Harbaugh's DNA. So for me, I think that's probably, if the Chargers stay there, JC Latham, pick at 5, leaves the Giants in a great spot, as we mentioned. So now,
So Okay,
Yep, go
real
ahead.
quick here. No, just to give a shout out to a couple people in the chat. Whether it's Brian Grant saying the Vikings didn't do that trade to not get up there and get one of the top 4 QBs, obviously having 11 and having 23 right now. I agree with you. Like that we've talked about the Broncos before. We mentioned there at the top Daniels would prefer to go to the Raiders, but they just don't seem to have the ability to come up and get him. But the Minnesota Vikings are obviously a team in a really good position. I'll use this in tandem before we get to our talk conversation around the 6th overall pick for the Giants, and that's Dr. Pancake. Still loving the idea of trading back with Minnesota 11 and 23, picking up a stud corner and a wide receiver. If the Chargers stay there at 5 and they go with CJ Latham, they go with Joe Alt, whoever the case may be, then all of a sudden the Giants are in that spot. The trick there is, I think, we'll get into the Giants specifically here at 6. The hard part is like then teams start to look at, well, who do I need to get ahead of here? Right? Like who am I trying to beat out? If the Giants, if the rumor is the Giants would go JJ McCarthy, then teams feel like they got to get on the phone with the Chargers. They got to try to make that jump. Are teams clamoring to get to the Giants there when then it's the Titans in behind them, then the Falcons, then the Chicago Bears, and then you get to the top 10 there, it's the Jets. Like there is this weird world where after all the hype and smoke, unless one of those top 6 teams, Giants included, chooses to take JJ McCarthy, you could just see the conversation about how many teams are racing up the board to claim him. You need at least 2 teams wanting to come get somebody in order to make it a bidding war. Otherwise, I don't know. Maybe teams are just sitting and waiting for them to fall, right? We saw this a few years ago when it was Daniel Jones. Giants sat there and took Daniel Jones at 6, but Washington just waited for their opportunity in the mid-teens to get their guy. So a lot of different options are going to be able to fall there just to provide a little bit of context.
Yeah, Adam, I agree with you. Here's the thing. You have to have willing trade partners to be able to move up as well. Like the New England Patriots, for as much as they keep saying, yes, we're open for business, like they need a franchise quarterback. It might be there for them. They're going to take that quarterback if they're,
Yeah.
we always talk about like, well, they could build around the team. Yes, of course they could. But everyone keeps telling me that you need a franchise quarterback. So that's kind of what we're dealing with right now, thinking that they're going to be there. When you look at the Cardinals, it would be very difficult for the Cardinals to be able to trade out and be okay with giving up on a potential generational wide receiver. Like we've talked about Marvin Harrison Jr. at length. He has been like the odds-on number 1 wide receiver for 2 years. He was unbelievable in college. He has all the attributes and skills. You're telling me that the Cardinals would have to move out, get 2 first-round picks, and be okay with taking whatever's left over at 11 or 13 or 15. I don't know. If you have a chance to draft a generational player like Marvin Harrison Jr. and pair him with Kyler Murray, it feels like I would be surprised if the Cardinals ended up moving out knowing how great Marvin Harrison Jr. could be.
No, of course. No, of course, 100%. Lock him into there. I believe that the Chargers will stay and end up going offensive lineman unless somebody blows their doors off. So now we're at 6. Now we're at the New York Football Giants.
Yes.
And now we're at the conversation about where are the odds for let's talk about odds, JJ McCarthy. Let's talk about odds, Malik Neighbors. Let's talk about odds for our boy, Rome Odunze, the guy that we've been on from the beginning. And we can even feather in some high-level national narratives that are trying to support our agenda here. We're trying to get people on the Rome Odunze bandwagon. It's not exactly getting as much traction as we hope to get ahead of the draft.
Yes. Well, you say
Well, we
that,
got a
but
couple.
we'll get into it in a second. So there are 4 players that clearly are the most likely for the number 6 pick. Obviously, if the Giants end up staying there, under 10-1 odds to be able to get there are Joe Alt and JJ McCarthy are both plus 550. So they're kind of in the ballpark of like, yeah, maybe they're a possibility there. Maybe the Giants end up taking him. Maybe the Giants trade out. Maybe the Giants trade out for someone that wants Joe Alt or JJ McCarthy are 2 very likely possibilities.
Getting up there for the offensive line would be interesting if it ends up being that Latham goes ahead at 5, then all of a sudden some teams will look at that. The Jets are a team at 10 who would say, hey, we didn't think Joe Alt would be able to be there for us. We definitely are going to make a call about getting that guy in our line.
Or if JC Latham goes at 5 and at 6, the Titans are like, oh, shoot, we thought we were going to have our pick of whoever we want. If someone takes Joe Alt at 6, we're out of luck in this whole situation. So those 2 are probably the most likely trade out options. Or if JJ McCarthy falls to the Giants, that's a nice landing zone potentially. Then you get into Rome Odunze and Malik Neighbors. And right now, Malik Neighbors is a slight odds-on favorite at plus 170 over Rome Odunze. The odds, Adam, have dropped drastically from
As
where
well
Rome
they should.
Odunze was 3 weeks ago to where he is now, showing how close and how neck and neck it is. I, being the guy that was sold on Rome Odunze for a while, have gotten Rome Odunze at 5-1, kind of where JJ McCarthy and Joe Alt are sitting, for this potential pick. He has
Mhm.
now moved down to plus 250. So you
Yeah.
have Malik Neighbors at plus 170, Rome Odunze at plus 250. They're saying Malik Neighbors is slightly ahead of Odunze. And that seems to be kind of the general consensus is like 75% of the people are saying if the Giants take a wide receiver, that it's going to be Malik Neighbors. But there is a growing, smaller faction of people, including us, that believe Rome Odunze should be the pick here for the Giants at 6.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, listen, they already said obviously Neighbors out of LSU, so if they draft him, guy that can take the top off, you're going to get all the Odell Beckham Jr. comparisons in New York, and that's fine. Like I think that'd be, of course, a great post-draft discussion to be having and talking about walking in those shoes and asking Malik Neighbors what does he think about that, the legacy from LSU, all that good stuff. The interesting thing to me is when we've heard narratives about what the Giants are going to do and how it no two players are created equal. And when you get later in a draft and you pick second round, third round, fourth round, you don't look at those prospects the same way. But it's really hard for me to come out of last year when the Giants intentionally went to get Jalen Hyatt, who is the guy that can take the top off of defenses. Now, is it because he had as many reps as we hoped a year ago? Because the route tree is still in development? Because there's still work that he's going to do there? Like, does that cloud the judgment a little bit? Sure. And should having drafted Jalen Hyatt a year ago preclude you from taking a guy and a model of Neighbors? Of course not. But if I'm putting together a full complementary wide receiver, 2 years ago, I drafted Wan'Dale Robinson. Last
Well, it looks like Adam might be having a few technical difficulties right now. So while we wait for him to come back in, I think the interesting thing that we talked about Rome Odunze coming in at the 6th spot. We talked about how majority of beat writers and people that are close to the team think it would be Malik Neighbors if he ended up stepping in. One person, national reporter Albert Breer, put out his mock draft this morning. And when Albert Breer put out his mock draft, I listened because he's obviously a guy that is well connected within the industry. He has Rome Odunze going to the Giants at 6. And what I found most fascinating about it is what he wrote up of the reason why, which is something that Adam and I have both been saying for quite some time on this show. Here's the direct quote from SI.com's Albert Breer in his mock draft, putting Odunze at 6. Call this a hunch. The Giants just went through a tumultuous year. Malik Neighbors is a great prospect, but has a reputation for being a little difficult to coach. Odunze, on the other hand, has A-plus character in the same way as his old teammate Trent McDuffie and projects as a Devontae Adams type of receiver. So do the Giants take a swing on the hard-to-handle LSU receiver? They have some experience doing that. Or move down? I'm guessing the latter, and if they may wind up being part of the trade down too. So what essentially Albert Breer is saying is, who fits the mold of what the Giants are looking to do more effectively? Is it Malik Neighbors or is it Rome Odunze? We've said at length Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll have preached about character, the type of guys they want in there, the culture that they're trying to set. And while that might not be the be all end all, to me, it screams he is the exact type of player that they would want to come in, compete, be ultra aggressive, and really be a perfect culture fit for this team in this room. Now, I know what you're going to say. If they decide to go with someone like Rome Odunze, and welcome
if they decide to
back
go with
in.
a guy like Rome Odunze, we get into a great conversation, Andy.
Well, yeah, Adam, I just went through exactly what Albert Breer had said and why he
Yes.
decided that Rome Odunze was the pick for the Giants at 6. He talked about, hard to coach, A-plus character off the field for Rome Odunze as opposed to Malik Neighbors. And so it makes sense that the Giants would end up leaning, if you believe the way that Joe Schoen and Dable have talked about building their room.
100%. Yeah. So, I mean, the closing comment that I was trying to make there, it's like if I'm building on complimentary and I have Jalen Hyatt and I have Wan'Dale Robinson, putting Rome Odunze into that room makes a lot of sense. And then there's the element beyond it. You're mentioning Breer, the type of personality that Odunze isn't. I hate doing things where it feels like I'm going to knock down Malik Neighbors to build up Rome Odunze. That's not what I'm doing. If you told me that these guys were perfect prospects in every single way in terms of what their individual traits are, I would 100% right now still say Rome Odunze is the pick for me. That's the guy that I would prefer for the Giants. I like the idea of having that physical bodied receiver that can go up and make those challenging catches. And if the Giants have that opportunity, do you think that they will go Rome Odunze? Like we sit here, it's there at 6. The pick is ready to go in. While we've seen national level say that it could be a Rome Odunze pick, Malik Neighbors on a local level has gotten way more of the traction here in terms of being the Giants pick at 6.
So I'm coming slightly full circle on this. While I want the pick to be Rome Odunze, and I believe the pick should be Rome Odunze over Malik Neighbors, I
Yeah.
just can't get this JJ McCarthy stuff out of my head. If the Giants
I,
are sitting there at 6 and he is available, not because
yep.
I want that to be the pick, but because of all the things that you're hearing about. They didn't go to Easter and have him work out over a holiday weekend just to be able to throw a smoke screen out there, right, Adam? And like you saw his interview with Rich Eisen yesterday, which I thought was enlightening. Like
I was going
you
to
kind
say.
of might know where you're going, right? And he's like, yeah, maybe I have a hunch of the Giants, by the way. I've spent the most time with them. I love it. I did find it fascinating, and I did not put this together before, that Brian Dable was obviously at Alabama. The offensive coordinator of Alabama went to Michigan, and he comes out and he's
It
like,
was a good job by JJ McCarthy laying out the connection trail
and
to
I was like,
bring
what?
these guys
If this
together.
is true, why are you telling me all this before the draft? Is what I was thinking. Like the Giants might want to be like, hey, can you like maybe not say this? But
Easy,
but
buddy.
he's like, yeah. So when I sat down with Dayball and Shea Tierney and Mike Kafka and like basically ran through the whole entire coaching staff for the Giants, he basically said this is a very similar install package to what I had at Michigan. Like it almost seemed like he was saying I could run this offense in like 2 weeks if you just gave me enough time to figure out how John Michael Schmidt snaps the ball to me. And so, like,
Right.
that is now clouded my brain, and I don't want to move off of it. But I see a world where if the Giants are at 6, they haven't spent draft capital to move up. All of a sudden, bang, JJ McCarthy is the pick now.
Yeah, so let's do two things real quick here. Everybody joining us over live on YouTube, we appreciate you being in here. 8 p.m. is when the coverage is going to kick off tonight there for the NFL draft. And I don't know, I was trying to figure out like when will the actual first pick be made, right? Coverage starts at 8. So I'm on the clock, probably that 7 to 10 minute window. So it should come pretty fast here. If you're keeping an eye on it, they usually force the number 1 pick to delay a little bit. They don't, because you have to walk up and immediately say it. But then you'll probably have a little bit of speculation around Washington. Does Neighbors want to be there? Some buzz there. It'll probably be close to like 8:20 or after, maybe closer to 8:30 when the Giants are there for the 6th overall pick and having to make their choice. Ryan Williams in the chat. We're going to get to you in just 1 second. To your point, Andy, here's the other thing about it, right? So we can talk about, well, JJ McCarthy had a lot of buzz. Then all of a sudden it was that Drake May and trading up and going, getting their guy. You've even heard now lately, I can't remember who it was. Maybe you'll know off the top of your head. Penix Jr., the Giants like him maybe even more than JJ McCarthy and be willing to take him at 6. You're like, okay, I mean, let's just, everybody's in here, right? All the way back to Spencer Rattler. But what we said from those top 30 visits was the Giants invested heavily in visiting, talking with, and getting to know every quarterback all the way back to Spencer Rattler, who effectively, when you go look at prospect grades, is the last viable, you would think, quarterback in this draft that could come in and be a starter. And by the way, if Andy brings up in the background, and you found this the other day about quarterbacks of a certain age when they've been drafted, when you go through that list, it's kind of rare air that quarterbacks that are on the older side at the time of the draft end up turning out to be successes. Now, that's not to knock any one individual player, but specifically when you think about a Spencer Rattler who's going to be 24 years old, I do look at that and say, okay, so you're talking maybe mid-round quarterback who also has another hurdle to get over there when it comes to being successful. So if you have that, we'll hit that before we round back into this.
Yeah, so Jason Lisk posted, going back to the 2010 draft, here are the oldest quarterbacks to go in the first round and this year's candidates with what their age will be on May 1st. Obviously,
Yeah.
the oldest is Brandon Weeden, who went and played baseball for a while, then was like, I think I can play this quarterback thing. He was 28 and a half when he was drafted in the first round by Cleveland.
Yeah.
It's why Cleveland's been a
Coming
tire
into my
fire
prime.
forever. Like 28 and a half the guys are retired by then. So like, what a crazy
yeah. The average life cycle of an NFL player, you're coming in after they've all exited. Yeah, man, listen.
And what I find fascinating is, and a lot of this has to do with the COVID years, obviously, Adam, giving the players an extra year, a lot of the transfer stuff that's been happening, even NIL and players being able to get money while staying in college has impacted this. So I understand it is not an apples to apples comparison, but the next oldest player to be drafted in the first round would be Bo Nix at 24.2 years old. Next up is 24 years old on the dot, Michael Penix. And if you go to the next two oldest, Kenny Pickett at 23.9 years old and Ryan Tannehill at 23.7 years old. So those are the oldest quarterbacks. Now, the next one on the list is Joe Burrow. It feels like he's kind of in a slightly different category, but just for context, he is the next person on the list. But Adam, if you look at the top five, it would be Brandon Weeden, Bo Nix, Michael Penix, Kenny Pickett, Ryan Tannehill. What do they all have in common?
Oh yeah, well that's to your point about that age coming in there, like and to have Bo Nix and Penix be listed kind of in that clump there between guys. I mean, listen, I don't want to throw any shade on Tannehill. Like he's had a good career. You know, most franchises would probably sign up for that type of career. It's not perfect, but at least right? Pretty good baseline, getting to the playoffs, making some things happen. But by and large, take away, like when you run through that list again, take away Joe Burrow, not because you can do that. He was older and they took him and he's really good. But if you take away Joe Burrow, that list is littered with like Tim Tebow is at the bottom of that list. Not to knock Tim Tebow, but like he rounded out that list in terms of among the older players that have been taken. When you go and look at who was it? Also, so other guys like Ponder.
Carson Wentz was 23.3 years old. Jaden Daniels is the exact same age. Like Wentz had one very good year, but then all of a sudden he's been a backup journeyman for the rest of his career. And then you get into Christian Ponder, EJ Manuel, Baker Mayfield's there, Jake Locker, Mac Jones, Mitch Trubisky, Tim Tebow. These are all guys that are the most oldest that were drafted in the first round. You're like, the hit rate on that seems extremely low because it feels like you already know what their upside is. It's what you see today, right, Adam?
Exactly. So when you look at that list, you would say that only Tannehill, Burrow, I'll put Mayfield in there because he turned it right, like, rough time, whatever. He's turned it around. He's still been a success. That's it. Out of that list, which including now these rookies coming in with Nix, Penix, and Daniels on that list, that's 3, 6, 9, 12. That's 15. 15 players, age of the draft, 22.7 being the youngest with Tim Tebow. Out of those 15, 3, and I'll say out of those 12, right? Because 3 guys haven't been drafted yet. Out of those 12, 3 have been successful. Like that, listen, the numbers don't lie, right? Like when you take it to your point, you just mentioned it there. When a player comes in a little bit older and the transfer portal stuff is the COVID era has impacted how old players are, right? These guys might have come in younger. It doesn't change the fact that their development looks a little bit more like it does here. So if you are 22, 23, 24 years old coming in the NFL, the baseline might be a little bit more set. And if you're one of these teams looking at these players, and that's why Drake May is very attractive, it's why JJ McCarthy is attractive. Hey, these are young guys that we feel like we could have a 1 or 2 year runway on molding and continuing to develop into the player we think they can be, not the player that they are going to be.
Yes. And listen, I think it's like we've been hearing this quite a bit in the wide receiver versus quarterback debate, Adam. It feels like everyone has come around and said, what's the point of any of this if you don't have your franchise quarterback? And I think we can talk about it. You said you wanted to mention Ryan Williams in the chat. I think it's a good time for us to just bring this up as a piece of it. So Ryan says, what does it make sense? The Giants don't have a quarterback that's capable of playing NFL standards. Daniel Jones, not good, so on and so forth. And so I see that. And do you have an initial reaction to that piece of it?
If the Giants don't have a quarterback, the team is capable of playing up to the NFL standards, and please Daniel Jones, who is trashed the last 5. What sense does it make for the Giants to take a quarterback? Well, I mean, you have to at some point. And he doubled up with, we need to start with a quarterback and build around the receivers. We have especially Hyatt and can still get picks. Pick up some receivers in the draft as well. Yeah, I mean, we've had these discussions before about what it looks like to take a quarterback and how that functionally builds out your roster. It's a little bit of a misnomer that you need to get the quarterback and then proceed to build around them. There's actually a lot of examples where having the infrastructure in place and dropping the quarterback in can make a lot of sense. So the question becomes, from a Giants perspective, how far away do you think that infrastructure is for Big Blue?
Yes, and Adam, you touched on it, and this is something that drives me crazy, is that you hear this narrative that comes out from everyone, and I don't know why it's just been taken as gospel at this point, where like this is the only way that it build a team. It's like you have to get a young quarterback on a rookie deal and then put all of this stuff around him in order to be successful. And Adam, we're gonna break this down larger on a larger episode of OGP after the draft. But I just want
That's
to
right.
debunk that very quickly in like 30 seconds. Okay.
Sure. The stage is yours.
The Super Bowl winning quarterback last year was Patrick Mahomes. He's one of the top paid quarterbacks in the league. He
Yep.
repeated as champion when he was one of the top paid quarterbacks in the league. Mahomes might be the greatest quarterback of all time. So how do we reconcile this piece? 3 years ago, the Los Angeles Rams traded for a quarterback when they had the infrastructure in place. Stafford was one of the top paid quarterbacks in the league when he came over and won a Super Bowl. Before that, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers had a ready-made situation. They traded for Tom Brady, who was one of the most expensive players, top paid at his position, and they won a Super Bowl. When you go past that, it's Patrick Mahomes again. Okay, so you need a top one or two quarterback of all time on his rookie deal, who ended up signing a $450 million extension a couple months after that. Before Patrick Mahomes, it was Tom Brady again when he was one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the league. Before that, backup Nick Foles making $7 or $8 million ended up winning it. The year before that, Tom Brady highest paid. The year before that, the Denver Broncos, ready-made team. What do? They trade for Peyton Manning. He's paid as one of the top 15 quarterbacks in the league. And before that was Tom Brady. He was the 13th or 14th highest paid quarterback in the league. So the idea, Adam, and I don't want to say that that it's not the path that you can choose, is that
Sure.
it's not the path that teams have chosen in order to win
Yeah.
Super Bowls. Look at the Broncos, look at the Buccaneers, look at the Rams. They have all built the team the right way and said, we are just one guy away. Now's the time to pull the trigger. So for everyone that comes back and says, no, the only way you can do it is quarterback rookie deal, fill the team, it's just not true.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that, and Ryan, I'll go ahead and throw you up here because we're talking about what do you guys think the best decision is the Giants starting tonight, and we're going to get into that here in just 1 second. But that to your point, and now the one thing I will throw in is that when you look back at a lot of those teams, so Tom Brady wins down in Tampa. Well, what had they done? Tried to draft a quarterback and had it not work out. So then they go ahead and they go get that franchise guy. Denver Broncos. Well, it's an opportunity no one really saw coming with Peyton Manning leaving the Colts, right? Same thing with the Rams. They had drafted Jared Goff. He got them only but so far, and then you go and you get that guy. But it still holds true that when you draft that player, it still comes down to, are they that quarterback, right? And the reason why everyone scrambles for it is because you need the franchise guy. And when you say we're going to take wide receiver X, like what Minnesota's going through right now, right? Well, they've moved on from Kirk Cousins. Now they're asking the question. We have a number one wide receiver. And if we don't get him a guy that can get him the football, all of a sudden we're going to be dealing with that new set of issues. And you can understand why one of the best receivers, the best receiver in the game, will be looking around going, hey, what are we doing here, right? Balancing it out is critical before we plant our flag on 6 and talk about the impact of it, by the way, because that's a big part of this. The other big thing for me is when you are the Chiefs, when you are, listen, I hate to say it, the Eagles, who find ways to manipulate and always be successful and always be competitive. They turn things over quickly, right? There's sustainability there. So you can afford to maybe take some swings and misses and have some successes and failures. When you're the Giants and you look back at their track record of late, that's why I think there's a heightened sense around it, because you've been bad and you've made bad decisions. Daniel Jones was a mistake. It was a bad decision. Maybe going all the way back to Saquon Barkley and drafting him second overall, bad decision. Well-run organizations are much easier to trust when they decide what they're going to do, as opposed to looking at teams that have struggled and saying, well, can you hit the home run? If you're sitting here now and you can get your franchise guy, we're going to trade back. We're going to build the team the right way. There's always going to be that little suspicion from the fan base of, can you build a team the right way? Because we haven't necessarily seen that you're capable of doing it. And reminder, the Chiefs had Alex Smith sitting in there, and they had to make that choice. The 49ers had that choice to make years ago when they were going to the playoffs with him. Unfortunately for Alex Smith, but all of those things were like, hey, we have our safety net, And then we have what we could move to, what we believe in. And the Giants have never quite gotten that system in place. It's actually what they did once upon a time when they had Kurt Warner and then went and drafted Eli Manning. And midway through a very young season, when they could have still stayed competitive, they said, it's time for us to go with our rookie quarterback and start his process under center.
Yeah, you're right. It seems like there's a natural
I blacked
transition
out.
there
How did
that
that go? Was that good?
that was good. Yeah. It feels like these teams get the team to a certain level, then see the limitation of the quarterback and say, let's bring in the guy that puts us over the top. I personally
Right.
just don't think the Giants are there right now. Joe Schoen
No.
doesn't think they're there. He has said multiple times that they are more than one player away. So by that logic, by Joe Schoen's logic, trading a bunch of draft capital, this year's first, this year's
Mhm.
pick 47, next year's first runner to move up and get Drake May is kind of counterintuitive to what, Joe Schoen has been talking about this whole time.
Yeah, okay, so really quick on that. On the trading up for Drake May piece, that's where I agree with you in terms of philosophy, right? Because if you have to sacrifice a ton of future assets to go get who you think could be the franchise guy, then you're going to spend the next 2 to 3 years trying to fix and build it up. Then you're going to pay Drake May. And listen, if he's great, then he's great, and that's awesome. But if it doesn't work out, then all of a sudden you've kind of broken your franchise for another 3 to 5 seasons. Whereas right now, pick 6, Giants come up. If they choose to just sit there and take JJ McCarthy, well, we've discussed this before. Hey, Daniel Jones, you're paying him $40 million and you just paid $5 million to Drew Lock and it could be $8 million with incentives. Do you want all that money in the books? Not ideally, but 1 year from now, when JJ McCarthy is just 22 years old and you say, hey, we've got our franchise guy, maybe we bring Lock back on a veteran deal to back him up and Daniel Jones is gone, all of a sudden you can paint that picture and it didn't cost you anything to do it. So that being the case, we have stay there at 6. JJ McCarthy's available, certainly a viable option. I don't think you can take it off the table. You and I might say Rome Odunze is the next phase here, Andy, whether or not we think trade offers come in the door and if the Giants should be willing to do that. And how would it impact at all 3 phases, right? How would it impact the Giants if they stay at 6 and draft going into 47, 70 and down the line?
So let's say Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, and JJ McCarthy are there as we hypothesize in this mock that it could go. It sounds like this is where the tea leaves are going. Let's say the
Yes.
Minnesota Vikings call and they say, we'll give you 11 and 23 for pick number 6 and your 4th round pick, just to give us a little something because we're giving you 2 first rounders,
Sure.
right? If you're the Giants or you're the GM, Adam, what do you think the Giants do? Because I think we've talked about how much we like Rome Odunze. We understand
Mhm.
if they want to reset the clock with a franchise quarterback, taking JJ McCarthy. Are you pulling the trigger on that trade option and getting 11 and 23? Or are you standing there and saying, I need to take one of these players because they're really transformative for our organization?
If the Giants are saying that they're going to take JJ McCarthy or trade back, then I think you reject the offers and you say, "Sorry, we can't do it." I think it's a different conversation if we're talking about we're thinking between Malik Neighbors and Odunze or trading back, right? Because in one avenue you're saying franchise quarterback, trading back doesn't make it the answer necessarily. But if it's a wide receiver, as good as they may be, it still would put options on the table. And unfortunately, while I could not do this quick enough in real time, we also had the hit percentage here, Andy, that you had brought up the other day too. So when we think about the ability to go after and get one of these players, the hit percentage, or we should say even the miss percentage on this, is a little bit more dramatic than you might think, specifically around the wide receiver position. So hits and misses, wide receivers, 21 hits, 56 misses. The hit rate is 27%. It's the lowest among all positions here. Tight ends 33, safeties 34, offensive linemen, really good hit percentage, center 92, 59% on offensive tackle, guard 50, which by the way, point stop, 50-50 chance is a good percentage. That's considered to be really good as a coin flip when you draft one of these guys. I think that probably does have to factor in here a little bit too for the Giants. If the Vikings call and say, we'll give you 11 and 23, we know what that big board looks like. Is it Thomas Jr.? Is there a cornerback? Is there an offensive lineman that they would like? And then 2 of those players that they would like to continue to fill out this roster. My only concern, I'll ask you, is the top 30 picks, not that it's the end all be all, but there's not a lot of names that you would say fall into that range for them. Jordan Morgan, Arizona, 40th overall on ESPN's big board. Is that worthy of being taken all the way in the first round of 23? Likely not. And then specifically around the cornerback position, that might be the next most likely thing you think the Giants would go to if they're at 11. Let's go get, we'll get Mitchell or we'll get Arnold. Well, okay, maybe. But again, go look at their top 30 visits. They brought in Kool-Aid McKinstry out of Alabama. That's the 27th overall. And then after that, it's the 86th overall in Andrew Phillips, who I happen to like a lot. You go all the way down to 227 with Chow Smith Wade after that, and then 365, talking about a priority undrafted free agent in Chigozie Inuzum out of Colorado State. So, like, paint me the picture. Tell me that they talked to guys that are safeguarding that version of it. If anything, I can go look and say, oh, they talked to Dallas Turner. And then you go, is that edge rusher? Is that the next best priority if you move back to 11 and make that pick? So it's interesting. I don't have a lot of breadcrumbs to follow here that would suggest the Giants prepared for this. And if you're thinking about being willing to do that, I would assume Joe Schoen would have at least had these little touchstones. Most importantly, wide receiver, and having looked at guys like Mitchell out of Texas or Thomas Jr. out of LSU.
Yeah, it is interesting. It doesn't seem like the top 30 visits and foremost of anyone that they love in that middle range there. I mean, trading out does present you a couple of options. We mentioned why we wouldn't want Bo Nix or Michael Penix. It does make it more palatable at 23 or even potentially at 11 if you were thinking about
QB
getting
would be the big one,
because you've recouped draft capital. So those would be possibilities. They had a local visit with Chop Robinson, edge rusher at Penn State. We've said before, like, I don't know if edge rusher is really the need, but if you really want to stack an area where the Giants could be successful, imagine Chop Robinson, Brian Burns, and Kayvon Thibodeau all putting their fingers in the ground and just being an absolutely dominant force. Like, maybe they triple or quadruple down on one of these areas and say, we know we have deficiencies, but we will be the best at X in the league, and you will have the game plan for that every single time.
Yeah, I don't. And by the way, it's like, I don't hate that, right? When you look at the team and their areas of need, we go, oh, we know they need secondary help, cornerback, safety. And you say, well, you went and got Brian Burns, and then you still have Ojulari. He deals with his injuries. You know that you went and got Okereke. You have Thibodeau. You have Dexter Lawrence. You go, maybe we just make ourselves so effing dangerous on our defensive front and it does. And we've seen this before with the Giants. It makes life easier on the back end of the defense when you have guys that can just wave after wave come after an opposing quarterback. Quick shout out to side guy, Bri, freaking flyer. Please. This is all caps. So I think he's pleading. It's a demand. It's a request. It's everything above. Just make the pick that knocks it out of the stadium. Here's the best part. We won't know. They could pick Rome Odunze. They could pick JJ McCarthy. They could trade back. All these things we won't know immediately. You know, it's funny. I mentioned it about the Patriots, and if the Giants could have gotten up there on draft night, the Patriots would trade back and get to 6 and pick JJ McCarthy or whatever they're going to do. The Giants would trade up and get Drake May. And when that moment happened, everyone would either think that the Giants had made a huge mistake or a brilliant move, that the Patriots had made a massive mistake or a brilliant move, and we won't know. We will not know on draft night who made those right decisions. Last thing on the trade down that I'll mention here, and then I want to talk impact overall on what it would mean for the draft for the Giants if they traded back or if they stand pat, is the 11 and 23 from Minnesota is intriguing. I actually think, again, if you go JJ, if you're sitting there at 6 and you're not thinking quarterback, then I like the idea of a Denver Broncos. I like the idea of getting a future first round pick, because then it safeguards me against the idea of Giants over under 6.5 wins this season. What if they accidentally walk into 8 wins? What if they accidentally squeak into a wild card spot? Then all of a sudden next year, when you maybe are looking at that quarterback board and wanting to go get your guy, you don't have the ammo to go do it. So that's an interesting part of it to me too. Multiple picks this year feels really sexy and exciting. And we've seen this before. They drafted Daniel Jones. They drafted Dexter Lawrence. One worked out, one did not. I like the idea of getting a first round pick in the next year's draft class, just so you can play with it and see where it ends up landing, especially if you're talking about a team like Denver. I don't know if they're going to be good this year. So if I can get their pick and maybe be talking about having 2 top 10 picks next season, that's a big factor, even though we know, at least perceptually right now, next year's draft class is weaker.
Yeah, well, you talk about the Broncos at 12. They obviously don't have the draft capital to necessarily move up because they're still hampered by the Russell Wilson trade, as well as trading draft capital to get their coach in Sean Payton. So that's why you've been hearing rumors about how there's potential players, productive players that could be available in a trade. Patrick Surtain, one of the all-pro type cornerbacks, young, would fill such a huge need. If the Giants were offered 12 Patrick Surtain and maybe a little sprinkle in a little something else, that's definitely something the Giants would have to consider, knowing that they could shore up the cornerback position, knowing that they could end up using 12 on, I don't know, Brock Bowers or someone that is an offensive weapon at that point. The Broncos are an intriguing one because I think the players would be important. We've mentioned Cortland Sutton as a trade candidate. It's funny.
Yeah.
The Denver Broncos team shop has drastically reduced Cortland Sutton's jersey cost
No.
down from $149 down to $49.99. So if you want to get
Let's
one of the
go.
brand new jerseys, you can, knowing that he might not even be there after today. But I think Cortland Sutton, Patrick Surtain, the 12th pick, future assets are all something that would be intriguing to the Giants, knowing they need cornerback help, knowing they need wide receiver help, and it not moving them so far out of the first round that they can't get an impact player at 12 as well.
Yeah, of course. So it's a fascinating one, and you even mentioned there Brock Bowers, and we know everything that's been going on when it comes to Darren Waller and what that's going to look like for him and what it's going to look like for the Giants. So all of a sudden, a little trade down scenario where, yes, you move out of those wide receiver groups. Is it too early to take a Brian Thomas Jr., but a Brock Bowers is sitting there for you, and at least the way that he gets discussed, he's a transformative talent for an offensive scheme, regardless that he's listed at tight end. So that matters there too, certainly as well. Let's talk about here as Kareem comes in with, let's say the Giants go with the wide receiver at 6. I don't think that would be a building block piece for the franchise, especially if they decide to wait until next year to go QB. Here's one of the interesting parts about that too. We've talked about how fifth-year options really matter, and that's true. But when they always talk about as soon as you draft a quarterback, the clock starts ticking. When we draft a wide receiver, the clock starts ticking. We just had one of my darlings from the NFL draft from seasons ago in Detroit. He's going to go ahead and get $30 million. Amon-Ra St. Brown is cashing in. So the ticking clock also happens with positions that are just being highly valued right now in free agency. And it doesn't matter, but if you're talking about building blocks and putting them in place, there is also a reality to when you take wide receivers, and then what will it look like when you need to pay them 4 or 5 years from now? Listen, is that too far down the line to be overly concerned in this moment when you have a great talent? Of course. But it is a reality, and you do have to kind of have that gauge in there, especially if you're the Giants and you have Wan'Dale Robinson, you have Jalen Hyatt, you bring in Rome Odunze. Listen, happy problem to have if they're all really talented. But now you start talking about, well, what do we do when we have to start paying some of these guys and we try to slot in where their values lie? You can't spend $100 million on your wide receiver core.
Yeah, I mean, look at just what you're saying. Look at the price going up. I've talked about this before in the first round and why the first round picks are so valuable on specific positions. It's why you see them get drafted more often than others. Like a great punter is like, if you think about it, just going at the craziest level, right? A great punter, the highest paid punter in the league is making what? $4 million. Like the difference between the top paid punter and the lowest paid punter is between $1 and $4 million. Not really going to, cash strap you in terms of cash.
Right.
What happens in the wide receiver room, the offensive tackle room, the edge rushing room, and the quarterback room is that the price just keeps going up and up. And if you swing and miss in the draft and you have to go into free agency to solve those problems, they are extremely expensive to solve. Amon-Ra St. Brown is getting $30 million a year as a guy who, yes, has been productive, Pro Bowl type player, like good for him to get his money. But now wide receivers, just like offensive tackles, edge rushers, and quarterbacks, are demanding $25, $30 million with quarterbacks demanding $50 million. You have to address these positions, get that 5th year guaranteed so that you have them under team control for longer and be able to build around them. It's why those are the positions that I really look at as the targets in the first round. It doesn't mean you can't go look at another position like linebacker or safety, but it is one of those factors that at least I put into it, and I know Joe Schoen is putting into it in terms of who we take in the first round.
Okay, so let's talk about it from this angle. The Giants stay at 6, and they take JJ McCarthy. How do they do? And I see you, Mr. Duck. We'll talk about Spencer Rattler here in a minute as well. We've mentioned him before a couple episodes ago, but we will talk about him. The Giants take JJ McCarthy at 6 because he's young and they can develop him and all the system ties. Now you have picks 47, pick 90, pick 107, 166, 183. What do you think ends up being the most likely scenario here as we start to wind ourselves down? Because when you look over at the top 30 visits and try to construct it, we know first and foremost, I'll tell you mine. Get into this here. Darius Slayton, an extension happens and they reshape his money because you didn't get your elite number 1 and you want to keep that intact. Maybe there's a trade coming. Maybe they go after one of the big guys. I don't know, but I think you can wait a year to make a decision like that in the wide receiver room. And then you just say it's Daniel Jones, it's Drew Lock. But when you look at their top 30 visits, I start to think about a player who I've been talking about a lot in Jaden Hicks, 59th on the big board, I start to think about a player like you brought up in Estem or Esteem. You'll correct me on that. Out of Notre Dame, the running back, 157. So that's a 166 type of pick you can go for. I start to think about Ben Sinnott out of Kansas, right? And saying 93. Okay, that's a 107-ish kind of pick, right? That to me feels like it. And then the big question is just about cornerback really at that point. But does it stand to serve that you think if they stay at 6 and take JJ, I would just kind of follow the breadcrumb trail through their top 30 visits and see where guys slot in. Because all of a sudden you're saying 47, is that too early for Hicks? Will he fall to 70? But you can kind of easily paint a picture here. And you did a great job a couple episodes ago of highlighting what Joe Schoen has done with top 30 visits and how a lot of those guys that they talk to end up becoming Giants.
Yeah, we talk about last year's top 30 visits. Out of the top 30 visits, Joe Schoen had 4 guys that he visited with that he ended up drafting. That's Deonte Banks, John Michael Schmitz, Jalen Hyatt, and Trey Hawkins. And if you look back even into the year before that, top 30 visits with Kayvon Thibodeau, Evan Neal, and Cordell Flott. So clearly Joe Schoen is taking it very seriously with these visits. You would expect for there to be multiple guys from this year that the Giants end up drafting. Dan Duggan did a great job of kind of breaking down in his mind where he thinks some of these players would slot. We already talked ad nauseum about number 6, so we don't need to go into that. But his second round targets would be Bo Nix, Jordan Morgan, Cooper Beebe, Johnny Newton, the defensive lineman, Chop Robinson, Kool-Aid McKinstry, Max Melton, and Jaden Hicks. So he's got a little bit of offensive line, a little bit of edge and cornerback positions, as well as safety. So there are different places the Giants could go. Obviously, I think Jordan Morgan would be a steal for them if it ends up being a second round talent that they're looking at, but they clearly need a cornerback. So looking at Max Melton, they obviously visited his local day. He's a local guy from Rutgers. He seems to fit the mold. I really think if the Giants go quarterback, they'll look to address cornerback or even the safety position in the second round.
It's interesting. Okay, so if I painted my picture, I'll throw in another name they had with top 30 visits, and that's Mason Smith out of LSU. I always like, when they say, hey, give me Matt Miller's pro comp, Marcus Spears. Okay, I guess, if I'm looking at a 6'5", 306-pounder who would go ahead and, like we just said before, turn that defensive front into an absolute mauler that you would have terrifying nightmares about before you go to play them on Sunday. I'll put that a little bit into the mix. You mentioned their cornerback, Max Melton. I actually really like Andrew Phillips there, the Kentucky product. That's more of a 107, 70, but probably 70 pick, I would say there. So if we're thinking about it, I would say that if the Giants, whatever they do at 6, when they back it up, I think wide receiver becomes a different priority in a different way, whether it's in-house or making a trade. And then I would throw maybe best defensive player available there at 49. I like Jaden Hicks being in the mix at 70. And then I like having players, like I said, cornerback Phillips. I don't mind having the tight end out of Kansas going towards 107. And then you think back even a little bit deeper and you start to talk about guys like the running back position there as well. There's some sleeper wide receivers that I could get into here too. Go ahead.
You mentioned Andrew Phillips. I think he's a name that you should really be keeping an eye on. He had a top 30 visit with the Giants. Cornerback out of the University of Kentucky, 5'11", 190 pounds, 85 player rating. He's the 15th ranked cornerback at his position. But, when you're looking at who the top 10 are, you're talking about guys that are all going in the first 30 or 40 picks. So you have to start thinking about what could be in the third round. I think Andrew Phillips is a good one. During the combine, they were talking to scouts. They said Andrew Phillips is a combination of Marshawn Lattimore and Darius Slay. That would play for the Giants. NFL Draft Buzz doesn't feel that highly of him. They say that he would cut his teeth kind of on the special teams, try to carve out a role as a potential starter. That's what you're looking at in the third and fourth round. I don't know if necessarily he's going to go in and be guarding the wide receiver number 2 on the outside on an island day one. I do like you calling him out at him. I think he's someone that do not be surprised if he gets drafted. Joe Schoen has already taken Wan'Dale Robinson from the University of Kentucky. Maybe we start seeing some trends in a pipeline of something like that. He's a name that I definitely think is in play for the Giants at 70 and 107.
Okay, so a couple of things here real quick as we round out. We wanted to do this in the morning. Why? Because we're going to try to come back late. We're going to come back in later. I'm going to try to do some live coverage, obviously, when the draft is kicking off, and then be rejoined by Andy to react and reflect on it. And then If you are Mr. Duck, thoughts on Spencer Rattler? Well, if the Giants don't take the quarterback at 6, we're going to talk about him heading into Friday and heading into the weekend. Side guy Bry, if we're talking about not getting a big running back early, which I think seems less likely, what about Tracy from Purdue? Let's talk about him as we work our way into the weekend. So we'll set the table for the mid and late rounds and things that we like here. Put your flag in the ground, though, Andy. I'll be on live later. Pick 6 comes up. The Giants can't trade up. They're there. What is the draft pick for the New York Football Giants? You can give me what you want, but also give me what you think it will be.
What I want Rome Odunze. I believe he fits everything that Joe Schoen has been talking about and everything that the Giants desperately need to make this offense better after losing Saquon Barkley, maybe having Darren Waller not come back and retire. I do believe that Rome Odunze is the best fit. And also, if we are to believe what Joe Schoen has been saying all along, then Rome Odunze is the pick, Adam. He has to be the pick for the Giants. He said he wanted to add a quarterback when he was talking at the Combine. Shortly after, he added Drew Lock, paid him significantly money to be the backup. They have Tommy DeVito in the room. They have this big cap hit on Daniel Jones. He's saying that they don't necessarily need a quarterback. I believe Joe Schoen is looking at this and saying, we're going to just go with what we've got this year at the cornerback position. Let's get a cornerstone guy in Rome Odunze at 6 that we know is not going to give us a headache, that we know is not going to give us problems. And let's build the team that way. Our jobs are on the line. This is the guy for me. I am saying I want the Giants to pick Rome Odunze, and I think Joe Schoen will pick Rome Odunze at 6.
Our jobs are on the line. Let's not pick a quarterback right now because I got to tell you guys, then we'll really be under the microscope here. Listen, I do want the pick to be Rome Odunze. We've talked about him a lot. He is such a phenomenal player on the field. Seems like a phenomenal person off the field as well. So I would lock into that for sure. I do wonder about the JJ McCarthy being there and if the Giants would ultimately take him. So I believe I'll even say I believe the pick should be Rome Odunze. I believe they end up taking, I almost even want to be like to take Malik Neighbors because wouldn't that be the tragedy of our wide receiver pick? But I'll say that they end up taking a JJ McCarthy here. If they go Andy's route, then Spencer Rattler becomes more interesting, right? Later in the draft, potentially. If they go my route, then all of a sudden you start to think about the way it unfolds. And oh, by the way, just as a caveat, if there was a trade down for the Giants and they get second and third round assets, that makes it possible maybe to go up and target a player that they brought in for a top 30 visit, a Kool-Aid McKinstry out of Alabama, right? Key position of need. So a lot of things are going to happen here. We tried to give you a pretty good spectrum of what's possible. We'll see how it all plays out tonight. And that's the best part of it. We're fun to speculate, discuss, talk. As soon as the pick comes in, we'll highlight it. And just like I did years ago with Daniel Jones, I get immediately excited about the player. I can't wait to see him on the field for the Giants. And I start talking about how valuable he can be. So no one's going to get taken here that I'm disgusted by becoming a New York Football Giant. Once you're in the fold, it officially makes you a part of Big Blue. The other thing that you can do is officially be a part of OGP like you did, man. Great to see everybody in here from Kareem, from Side Guy Bry, from Mr. Duck, early and often, Dr. Pancake, everybody, man. Appreciate you coming in. Stay tuned on YouTube, One Giant Podcast, on Twitter at One Giant Podcast. I'll put out officially when I'll be on to start the coverage of the live draft. We'll let you know when Andy and I are going to reconnect as well. Cannot thank everybody enough for this. Go check out Personam, one of our great sponsors, and also Potential. We'll go ahead and have all their descriptions in the show notes for you as well. Until next time, I guess, Andy, at AMAC214 and at Adam Armbrecht, I'm going to go black out. As Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, especially at 6, let's go Big Blue.